Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome back to Chapter 17. We're talking about plants. In the last video, we had just started talking about how mosses and ferns make spores, and that a spore, it's inappropriate to call it a seed. Seedless plants being mosses and ferns, seedless plants release haploid, single-celled spores that must survive independently. In the term of, or if we're talking about a moss, this is the thing that has to survive independently. This is that haploid. Haploid means half the normal number of chromosomes. And if your normal number of chromosomes is 2 copies of each chromosome, then half the normal number would be 1. How many chromosomes do we have as humans? Humans have 23 pairs of chromosomes. We have a total of 46. So what is our haploid number? And what's half of 46? Our haploid number is 23. A spore is a haploid clump of DNA, really, that has to live and survive on its own. And this is the product, this is the cell, the plant that grows from a haploid spore that was released. Seedless plants release haploid single-celled spores that must survive on their own as the gametophyte generation. Remember, we talked about the gametophyte generation. That's the one for a moth that actually looks like a little bitty tree. Before producing the next sporophyte generation. And the way the spores do that, or actually the way the gametophytes do that, is they're either male or female, and they make sperm and egg, and they come together, and that makes the sporophyte generation. So the spore becomes the gametophytes make the sporophytes. Seed plants launch next generation sporophytes ready to go. And that's why I said it's not appropriate to say that a spore is a seed. A seed is a special structure. Spores, though they have the same goal as a seed, and that goal is to reproduce the plant, to be the next generation of the plant, which is the goal of a seed. It's just that alternation of generations. One generation is a sporophyte, which has 2 copies of each chromosome. It drops spores, which is why it's called the sporophyte. The spores that it drops grows into separate little plants that have to survive and live on their own until they can make sperm and egg to come together, which then makes a little embryo, which becomes the sporophyte. Alternation of generations. 1 copy of each chromosome, 2 copies of each chromosome. We move on from the seedless plants to the seed plants, tracheophytes. What is your trachea? Your trachea is your windpipe. Take your 2 fingers, put it on your throat, underneath your voice box, gently. Press up and down. You feel those little ridges? Those little ridges are the rings that make up the support that go around your windpipe. Don't press hard. Your trachea. Your trachea is your windpipe. These are the windpipe plants. These plants have vascular tissues. They've got tubes running through them. They've got the xylem and phloem that we already talked about. They have pipe-like tissues for conducting fluid throughout the plants. Remember, we talked about 2 groups of plants before this. We talked about the bryophytes, mosses, 20,000 species. We talked about the pteridophytes, the ferns, 9,000-ish species, so not quite 30,000 for the 2 of them together. And then we talk about the tracheophytes in there. How many species? 300,000. 300,000 species. That's why I said when we talk about mosses, only 20,000 species of them, not that many species. 300,000 species of tracheophytes, of vascular plants. And if we went around the room and talked for an hour naming plants, everybody name a plant, we go on to the next. We did that for an hour. Everything we would name would be a vascular plant, because no one would name a moss. Someone might name a fern, but probably not. Everything else we would name would be a vascular plant. When you go to the home and garden section in Walmart, if it's not a fern, it's a vascular plant. Vascular plants. When you think of plants, you think of vascular plants. Do note, this is a live oak. Do you see the person standing inside of the live oak? Vascular plants get big. Our first group of vascular plants are the simplest. Remember, what is our strategy? We're talking about the plants and animals from least complex to most complex. Our first is the simplest, and these are the Gymnosperms. Gym means naked. Sperm means seed. So naked seed. A gymnasium, going to gym class. What are you supposed to do? Why is it called that? Well, it's called that because that's where the ancient Greeks went to go exercise, and they went and they exercised naked. Aren't you glad we don't do that now? Gymnosperms, naked seeds. Conifers, cycads, ginkgos, and neophytes. They don't make flowers and they don't make fruit. I hope you know what a pine tree looks like. You live in Georgia, right? Pine tree may as well be our state flag, right? This is a conifer. This is a group of plants called a cycad. We'll talk about cycads in just a little bit. And this one over here is called a ginkgo. And we'll talk about ginkgos. Ginkgos are really kind of cool in their own way. Interesting in their own way. Our first group of angiosperms is the largest group of angiosperms, and this is the conifers. The conifers, cone bearers. Con means cone. What does fair mean? Fair means to bear or to possess. A ferry boat carries you across the water. So these carry cones, these possess cones, cone bearers. Most of them are evergreens, not all of them, but most of them are evergreens. The leaves, the pine needles. The leaves live for 2 to 3 years most of the time. So they do actually drop their leaves. The needles don't stay on forever, and they actually do drop more needles in the fall than they do at other times of the year. But most of the time, the leaves will live between 2 to 3 years, give or take. Some conifers, the needles can live upwards of 45 years. Just imagine that. Just imagine that somewhere out there, there are trees that have leaves that are twice as old as you are. That are leaves that are as old as I am. A needle, a single leaf. Something that lives on most plants for a few months. 45 years. Here we see the redwoods, the sequoias. I'm not sure if you can see very well in this picture, but you can clearly see the trunk of the tree. This is a group of about 20 people at the base of the tree. Again, another huge tree, and these are the largest plants on the planet, the largest single plants on the planet, the tallest plants, the largest plants, the heaviest plants, the sequoias. One really interesting thing about the California redwoods is they get so big and they get so old that the branches will have branches that come off of them that go straight up. And again, look at this picture really close. Here's one right here, a branch that's growing straight up from this horizontal branch, and then here's another one right here. And if you look really close at that picture, these branches that are coming off of the tree, what is it? It's another freaking tree. The tree is so big that its branches become trees. So large that their branches become trees of their own. These plants are so huge, so large. Our next group of plants are called cycads. A cycad sort of kind of looks a bit like a palm tree, but it's not. A palm tree is an angiosperm. It's a flowering plant. We'll talk about angiosperms in the next video. The male cones are small. We talked about this pine cone. A pine cone, when you think of a pine cone, what you're seeing is the female pine cone. Male pine cones, if you go out and you look in parking lots and you look in your driveway, probably about mid-April. Around pine trees, you'll see a bunch of little curled, little bitty things with little scales coming off of them, kind of like a little furry kind of finger-looking thing. That's the male cone. The male cone makes pollen. Male cones are found at the top of trees. and they release pollen which drift down to the female cones, which are in the middle and the bottom of trees. The male cones are small, but the female cones can actually be quite large. Some female cones on these cycads can be up to 1 meter long and almost 100 pounds. But it's not like a 100-pound pine cone hanging off of a branch. That's not how it works. They actually grow up from the middle. They grow up from the center. And that picture that we looked at a few minutes ago, this is showing the cycad, and here's that cone. Looks a lot like a pine cone. And it's actually growing in the center of the plant. So if this plant is, so tall, then the pine cones don't hang down from the branch. They actually go straight up from the tip of the plant. Here we see a cycad. Again, cycads, they kind of look a lot like palm trees. If you've got a sago palm, go and look up online, look up a sago palm. A sago palm, lots of people have them as decorative plants in their yard. A sago palm is not a palm tree. A sago palm is a cycad. This is showing one of those female cones that can be very large. That one looks like it's probably about 18 inches long, and they can get double that size. Big cone. He looks really proud of that cone, doesn't he? It's like, yeah, I got that cone. Look at that cone. Our last conifer that we're going to talk about, our last gymnosperm we're going to talk about is the ginkgo. The ginkgo is a really interesting species because there's only one species of ginkgo. Let's look really close at this picture of the leaf. Does this look like a normal tree leaf? And the answer is no, it really doesn't. What does a normal tree leaf look like? Well, a normal tree leaf you can see that center vein, and then what comes off of that center vein is more branches. In the tree leaf, it kind of looks like a little miniature tree in the leaf. And we see all these little branches that are coming off the leaf. And look at this. You don't see that center vein. There is no center vein coming out. It's just a whole bunch of veins that spread out. It kind of looks like a duck's foot. And this is because the ginkgo is so different from all the other plants, from all the other trees, is because it is ancient. It is ancient. It is the last surviving member of its division. And within plants, a division is the same thing as a phylum. So domain, kingdom, phylum, continent, country, state. The ginkgo would be like this is the only family that lives within one particular state. How many families live in a state? Oh God, hundreds of thousands of families, millions of families live in a state, and not the ginkgo. The ginkgo would be the only family that lived in all of Georgia. So it is unusual that you've got a group like this that is represented by a single species, only just one species. The plants themselves are not necessarily that rare. It's just the fact that they've got no members of their division. And it's because they're so ancient. They are ancient plants. They haven't changed in 80 million years. Literally, T-Rex walked underneath of ginkgos.